Today, I want to talk to you about modern day leadership. And these are thoughts that I've had through the last few decades, including time spent at Bank of America Merrill Lynch and at JP Morgan Chase in Singapore. My thoughts have also been influenced by the first Stephanian Leadership Cohort that I co-hosted in October 2020. And you can read about this in the credits below. St. Stephen's College is, of course, one of the oldest and most prestigious colleges in New Delhi, and this is for both the arts and the sciences. So leadership tries to differentiate itself from managers, okay? So leaders provide the vision, they inspire confidence, and they provide the steer required to take an organization down its strategic path. So they help to develop the strategy and they help to steer the organization down that strategic path. And managers are more doers. So they sort of implement the leader's strategy. They also contribute to that strategy through briefing notes where they share data, they collect data, which is required for the strategy. And leaders are expected to develop strategy and execute it in as democratic a fashion as is possible. The financial collapse of 2008 is incredibly important from the point of view of leadership. It exposed the fact that leaders which adopted a highly leveraged model, right? They took huge amounts of loans, basically. They were basically playing around in a casino. And it also demonstrated the fact that men tend to take excessive risks. Men tend to look at the upside. Men are kings of good times, as they say. Men look for adventure, okay, and some men have an everlasting belief in their own luck. And that's also known as greed. And this is part of the evolutionary history of mankind where, man was the hunter-gatherer, so he went out, he took risks. And this sort of underscores and demonstrates the testosterone-driven thinking that a lot of men suffer from. In 2008, there was a structuring of asset-based securities which were backed by mortgages, which basically had a number of poor loans, so poor lending quality, poor credit quality specifically. And they were selling these assets-backed securities, and that's essentially what triggered off the financial collapse. Women, on the other hand, tend to be more risk-averse. They tend to focus more on detail, and they do a lot more in-depth thinking, and they take a lot more time to make their decisions in a more systematic manner. And there's a lot of research to back these assertions. And certainly in this world today, it's quite clear to regulators, to governments, that it's important for organizations. Whether we say, multinational companies or smaller organizations, banks, financial institutions, it's important to have an adequate representation of women at the board level. And this results in better risk management. It also results in better long-term profits. And this is also increasingly mandatory in many countries. So men are capable of evolving into megalomaniacs, where they have strong ambitions, a deep desire for power, and a need to dominate their space. Men are capable of grabbing wealth and showing off this wealth, showing off their connections, and even showing off the women in their lives. Men like playing king. So men have been known to go to wars over property, over women, and even their fragile egos. It's men who steal and rape. It's men who riot and kill. It's men who are religious zealots. And of course, patriarchy in the social structures only facilitates this entire process. Men tend to be led by other charismatic men. So charismatic by their definition. And men tend to not pay enough attention to detail and logic. In recent times, we've seen the rise of unqualified right-wing leaders who've pandered to extreme ideas for votes. So extreme ideas based on prejudice, on racism, and on hatred. And this also does not speak well about the thought process of their followers. Men tend to hunt in packs, they have a herd mentality. And this is also an evolutionary characteristic. However, it's important to note that owing to circumstances, many men could be thrust into positions, leadership positions, where they do brilliantly. So it's quite important to understand that there's no real formula based on charisma that we can attribute to becoming a leader. And of course, charisma means different things for different people. It's also desirable that leaders are liked. However, in an era of wage cutoffs and layoffs, it's very difficult to say that leaders will be liked by everyone. It's certainly true for some of the largest multinational companies that their top leaders could be both obsessive and difficult. And this is particularly true in one-on-one interactions with their subordinates. So there's no real formula on niceness or people management. At best, this is something that we desire from our leaders. There is also the other expectation of deep compassion towards people. However, it's really difficult to say again in an era of layoffs that these leaders truly have compassion. However, we can manage, for example, layoffs specifically in a compassionate manner. You could give people a 6-month wage. You could arrange for retraining and even counseling. And you can even arrange for rehiring both within the same company and in alternative companies. Then we come to the idea of shareholder value versus stakeholder value, right? And depending on what you focus on in isolation of the other, you can have very different results from a leadership perspective. In the case of shareholder value, you focus on your dollar. So you try to cost minimize and you try to extract maximum dollar from your employees. In the case of stakeholder value, you actually focus on looking after employees as stakeholders. And then you even start talking of quality of life. So the overall tone of leadership is important. It's important from an organizational culture perspective. Leaders today have to have a commitment, have to adopt the discipline of subjecting themselves to governance oversight. And this is, of course, required by banking regulations and particularly from a compliance perspective. And regulations also require a focus on effective implementation as part of this process. Leaders have to lead by example. They need to talk the talk and walk the walk, as they say. So a leader needs to have a vision which is both practical and doable. And he needs to be able to reflect this in terms of a balance between priorities, costs, timeframes, and returns. And a leader who puts forward ideas which are too impractical or difficult to implement can fundamentally risk the future of the company. So a leader needs to be able to think strategically and also think of the short-term fix. So a leader needs to be able to understand the project management discipline, what it takes to implement his vision. He needs to be able to garner the resources in terms of money, in terms of people, and in terms of technology. If he can't do this, then his vision would be unfulfilled. So in short, a leader must also be a good manager. A leader needs to take people forward. He needs to be able to explain his vision in simple language. He must provide a clear picture of the future and how to get there. In this modern world, relationships are increasingly need-based. A leader needs to talk not just to subordinates, but also to stakeholders. And this includes the board and regulators. Hence, stakeholder management and regulatory management have become very important. A leader who's not politically savvy is unlikely to be able to survive in the organization. A leader must be able to get in front of people and not hide behind long emails. A leader must be approachable. He must be open to the views of people of all rungs of the organization, and this will give him a bounty of new ideas. He can't rely only on his intuition, because his intuition itself is founded on information and a subconscious analysis. A leader must know his weaknesses and must be committed to ongoing training. He must know all the facts. Research-based leadership has become very important. A leader must get involved with industry benchmarking exercise. He must talk to his peers. He must keep the vision and message realistic. As they say, a leader should not overpromise. In fact, he should underpromise and overdeliver. It's important to learn from failure. Bank mega loan scams in India have shown us that evil is incremental and leverage is seductive. Leaders who originally had a great vision can find that vision corrupted by their own megalomania and by followers who shower adulation and don't question their decisions. A leader must be humble. He or she must exercise the self-discipline of effective governance, of subjecting their decisions to effective governance, of avoiding autocratic decisions. Leaders who do not do this will soon find themselves skirting the boundaries of the law and eventually break it through either corruption or illegal use of resources raised, whether this is through banking or is through the investing public. Hence, in a modern day context, knowing the law and being fully committed to it is essential. Leaders who exploit loopholes and institutional capacity issues, for example, in law enforcement or in judicial enforcement, or they use their political clout to manipulate the financial system. Such leaders may have a long and successful run, but eventually their sins will catch up with them in almost a karmic manner. And such people can be said to be not leaders, but actually scamsters, because they cause pain to the people they do a fraud on. Hence, leaders must accept their societal responsibilities, the societal responsibilities of the companies they manage. They have to comply with environmental laws, with anti-corruption laws, with sanctions laws. They must also do charity. They must also do advocacy of the correct issues, for example, on healthcare. So these are clear dimensions of modern day leadership. Leaders that have connections must use this for positive outcomes that do good for society. In the ultimate analysis, the legacy of a leader, whether he is charismatic or accidental, is the culture of enduring excellence that he leaves behind. He must touch lives in a positive manner to be remembered with fondness and respect. Lastly, if you think Sir Winston Churchill is a great example of leadership, please read up about the Bengal famine. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks and cheers.